We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. After 98 days of denial and delay, the government has finally come to its senses. Because of pressure from the coalition, there will be no widow's tax. Why did it take so long for the government to do the right thing?
Order. The Treasurer is warned. No, we're going to hear that. We're going to do it properly. The Leader of the Opposition is going to do his question. If people are going to interject, I've got to hear the question. The Treasurer has the call. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. I really do. We have had draft legislation on this measure out for weeks for consultation. Consultation was due to finish on Friday, and we had, in that context, made it very clear that we would introduce legislation to deal with this issue. And during the debate about tax, Mr. Speaker, those opposite have complained about a lack of consultation up to this point. They've said that what we should have done is to flag taxes before the budget, which would have, of course, like other tax measures that have an impact on the day that they're announced, would have meant that there was a potential.
Order. Member Barker, there's far too much interjections. Just as I asked for silence from the Leader of the Opposition, I'm asking for silence for the Prime Minister.
Potential for windfall gains. Now, what we were asked to do last night, and it took me a millisecond to say, yep, we're up for that, was to pass our legislation quicker.
Oh, don't make us do that.
That we had put out there for consultation. So I was more than happy to do that.
Order.
Don't make us pass our ledge.
As a result of that, and the context here, Mr. Speaker, was the NDIS legislation that those opposite are going to vote for, to their credit.
Order.
Because what it will do is make sure that the system is sustainable. They kick that can down the road at a cost to the taxpayer because of a deal that they did in the Senate with the Greens. That is what occurred.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Order. Order. Members on my left, there's far too much noise. Order. When the House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering a better deal for gig workers, and why is this better than other approaches?
Call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Spence for that question and his many, many years of commitment in advocating for transport workers right around this country. Yeah. This week we saw a historic outcome which has delivered a world-leading minimum standard for platform food delivery drivers, enabled by the Albanese Labor government's workplace reforms. As of yesterday, tens of thousands of food delivery drivers will now have a minimum hourly of pay, and for some that will be a pay boost of up to 25%. Now, this outcome is a result of the Albanese government's world-leading workplace laws, which laid the foundation for gig workers to achieve a guaranteed minimum pay. Our government believes that these workers should not rely on tips to survive, and that's why, under our reforms, the Fair Work Commission has been able to determine a minimum pay and conditions for platform food delivery drivers. And starting this week, Fair Work's decision means that workers who deliver for services such as Uber Eats and DoorDash now have a minimum earnings safety net of $31.30 an hour. And these workers will now have critical protections such as accident insurance, dispute resolution processes and representation rights. Now, yesterday I met with some of these workers here in Parliament House alongside the Transport Workers Union, who have fought tirelessly for these minimum standards. I met with Alexi, who said she was getting paid as low as $15 an hour to rush on her bike from job to job on busy and unsafe roads just to make ends meet. Alexi said that these minimum standards mean she'll finally have certainty that she can pay the rent. I also met with food delivery driver Yusuf, who sometimes works 80 hours a week just to make a living. He told me, there have been many times where I haven't been able to sleep because I worried about not earning a minimum wage, but that all changes now. These minimum standards are a big step in delivering financial certainty for thousands of workers. It means food delivery workers like Alexi and Yusuf will no longer have to trade off flexibility for fair pay and safety. Now, Speaker, I'm asked about how this differs from other approaches, and yes, it does. While our government took protecting these workers as a serious matter, the Liberals, Nationals and One Nation voted against these changes. In fact, the Leader of the Opposition said that these laws were disastrous. It is absolutely clear there's only one party on the side of Australian workers, and that's the Labor Party.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The National Australia Bank has confirmed Labor's toxic taxes will send rents soaring by 30%. Will the Prime Minister guarantee rents will not go up by 30%?
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Today, NAB has clarified publicly, to quote the National Australia Bank, this was not a forecast, and it's important to note that we do not forecast rental yields. And a couple of points to make, Mr Speaker, that those opposite seem to have missed. The budget made no changes for people who already negatively gear property. None whatsoever. Arrangements that were in place up to budget night remain grandfathered in. So how could it possibly be the case that you can have this sort of absurd justification? Going forward, of course, negative gearing and the 50% capital gains tax discount can still be used for investment properties, but on new builds. So that when people are investing, they're not only investing in their future wealth and assets, they're investing in the future wealth and assets of the nation. And that is already making a difference.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition, point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. Look, the question asked a very simple proposition that the National Australia Bank had put, and it asked whether the Prime Minister was prepared to guarantee that rents won't go up by 30%.
I think the difficulty with that point of order is that the Prime Minister directly dealt with that issue in about the. Just let me finish, Leader of the Opposition. That the quote or comment that you moved, he dealt with that straight away. He's got the remainder for his answer of 1 minute 45 has to remain directly relevant. He can't stray into other topics. He'll have to remain his answer directly relevant to the question he was asked, and he has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I was asked about NAB, and I've said exactly what NAB said today. And I'm sure perhaps the Australian might clarify its position tomorrow. They might. They might. But that is very clear from NAB. and you can't be clearer, Mr Speaker, and there's a reason for that, of course, because the budget made no changes for people who already negatively gear property. And it's already making a difference. According to ABS data released on Friday last week, more investors are borrowing to build new homes than ever before. In the June quarter, there was a 27% increase in investor loans for new builds and a 20% increase for construction loans. That is, more investors are borrowing for new builds and more new builds are being constructed by developers. That is happening. And that's precisely what the aim of the policy was to do. The aim of the policy was to assist with housing supply, because we know that housing supply is absolutely critical. The ultimate aspiration for any Australian is to own their own home, and backing that aspiration is what our reforms are about. And throughout all of this debate, I haven't heard one person, perhaps the Leader of the Opposition might be the one, who thinks that the housing system is working. None. It is a broken housing system that we inherited, and we're fixing it to give young people a fair crack.
The call to the honourable member for Gorton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real change for working people, including those in the gig economy? Are there any alternative approaches that would undermine the wages and conditions of Australian workers?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Gorton for her question. And yesterday, our world-leading protections for Australia's gig economy workers came into force, a source of great pride for those on this side of the House, delivering real change for thousands of working people, people who don't have a lot of power in their workplaces by definition, the people who are delivering food or delivering products to someone's door, contribute to make life easier for Australians, but they don't have a great deal of industrial power. What it took was a government prepared to act on their behalf. That's right. Minimum standards, minimum wages, protecting the Australian way of a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, something that Labor has fought for since 1891. Now, the fact is that our economy has changed, and there are great benefits for Australians of getting things delivered right to your door. And that flexibility is a good thing. But just because jobs and industries change and adapt doesn't mean that working people deserve less protection or lower wages. Because when change happens, it's up to us to shape it for the better. For too long, delivery drivers in the gig economy fell through the cracks. No fair pay, no sick leave, no basic protections, and that happened because of those loopholes. And put simply, at times it not only wasn't fair, it's outright dangerous, because we know of the examples of people, delivery drivers, who've lost their lives because they're trying to get from A to B in 15 minutes for something that should take 25 or 30. So taking risks, literally losing their lives, is what has occurred. And that's why we passed this closing loopholes legislation, to make sure that every worker gets a fair go. And whilst we fought for and delivered that change, those opposite, the Liberals and the Nationals, did everything that they could to stop it. They voted against the legislation. They argued against the decision. They said reforming the industry was just too complicated. They chose to ignore the problem, and then they argued against fairness. That is their playbook. Labor chooses a different path. We choose to act, we choose to back working people, and we choose to deliver real change.
Before I call the member for Calare, I'll just do some acknowledgements and welcomes to the parliament. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is the Honourable David Janetsky MP, the Treasurer, Minister for Energy and Minister for Home Ownership in the Queensland Parliament. I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives of Youth Off the Streets, including CEO Judy Barraclough, Chairperson Anne Fitzgerald and Ambassador Tony Stewart, a former Deputy Speaker in the Legislative Assembly, as guests of the member for Blaxland. I see Graham Perrott, the former member for Moreton. Hopefully we'll stay for question time. And members of the Mannum Lions Club from the member for Barker's electorate, including Barry Burdett OAM and Joy Burdett, Malcolm and Gloria Ram, and Brenton and Denise Forrest. Welcome to you all to question time. We give the call to the honourable member for Calare.
To the Prime Minister. On the 30th of June, I stood in this House and asked when we would see federal funding for more lanes over the closed Convict Bridge on the Great Western Highway and an ongoing business support package. Since that time, we've seen accidents, detours and road closures seemingly on a daily basis. In fact, I was at the Donnybrook Hotel just recently and business is down by 60%. Prime Minister, when will we see some federal funding for more lanes over the closed Convict Bridge and an ongoing business support package?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Calare for his question and for his strong advocacy. Together with the member for Macquarie, they have both been relentless in pursuing these issues. Of course, as the member for Macquarie is aware, and I'm sure the member for Calare as well, we have had discussions with the New South Wales government about these issues. I've raised it very directly with Premier Minns and Minister King, who I'll ask to respond further on this, has also been deeply involved with the local community in addressing these issues.
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure.
Thanks, and thanks very much to the member for the question, and I too acknowledge both your and the member for Macquarie's advocacy on this. I understand this has had a really huge impact on the businesses, and I again thank you for drawing the House's attention to that. I've been briefed regularly by New South Wales Minister Aitchison as the New South Wales Government is managing the closure and the delivery of works. I can confirm that Minister Aitchison has written directly to me seeking a Commonwealth funding contribution towards the project. We welcome the opportunity to partner with the New South Wales Government, and I will have more to say very, very shortly. The New South Wales Government has announced they will enter into an alliance contract with Seymour White to deliver a new and more durable crossing at Mitchell's Causeway. Construction on parts of that has already started and the road is expected to reopen in the second quarter of next year. The New South Wales Government, I understand, on Friday announced an expanded package of support for local businesses affected by the closure, including increasing grants up to $25,000 for the most impacted businesses and expanding eligibility for assistance. And I know they are acutely aware of the significance of the issue. These announcements are providing communities with some better certainty about what to expect in terms of the reopening. We do know that this is a very important issue for both of your electorates, but for the Blue Mountains community in particular, and we'll have more to say shortly.
Call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real change by helping people under pressure here and now, while taking action to set Australia up for the future?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and for her advocacy on behalf of that fantastic part of Australia in the Northern Territory. And it was a pleasure to be with the member for Lingiari and the member for Solomon as well, on the Tiwi Islands just a short time ago. We are dealing with the challenges that we face here and now and doing it in a way that sets Australia up for the future. This is how Labor governs. Easing cost of living pressures, progressing real reform, delivering real change. And that's what has driven our reforms to secure the National Disability Insurance Scheme for future generations. Making sure that the scheme is sustainable is absolutely essential to continue for it to have that life-changing impact for Australians who need it well into the future. And that's why, as well, we're delivering the strongest ever reforms to tackle gambling harm, making it easier to switch off gambling ads online, breaking the connection between wagering and sport, minimising children's exposure to gambling ads, and strengthening rules around inducements. And I thank the parliament for coming together to deliver these reforms. People have engaged constructively right across the chamber, and that is a good thing. That is the way that the parliament should work. These important generational reforms are part of our broader agenda that is making a real difference. It is a fact that we still have today more fuel in Australia than we had on February 28, when this crisis began with the war in the Middle East. Now, that has been achieved by the government working with the private sector through the EFA reforms, and is an example as well of, with the announcement that we've made about potential new fuel refinery and other measures as well on sustainable fuels, is all about how do we also deal with those longer-term sustainability issues. And last week we hit the milestone of 500,000 cheaper home batteries installed. I was in the electorate of Mitchell last week, was very pleased to be there, which is where, of course, most of these home batteries are going in the outer suburbs and in the regions. In addition, the minimum standards and minimum wages for gig economy workers, we introduced our new ledge delivering wage justice for early childhood workers, and of course last week we found that the gender pay gap is at a new record low. This is what delivering real change looks like, helping people under pressure here and now while taking action to set Australia up for the future.
Give a call to the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. Yesterday, the Minister said she was damn proud of Labor's broken promises on capital gains tax and negative gearing. Is the Minister damn proud of making millions of Australians pay more for rent?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thanks so much, Speaker.
Order. Before the Minister starts, the House is going to come to order. The member for Moncrieff was heard in silence when she asked her question. She started interjecting straight away when she sat down. To responding to ministers, I don't know who did it. Whoever's interjecting on this side then, no point pointing. I didn't hear what this, otherwise I would have warned that person as well. Okay, well, so we're just, if everyone can just cool it, we'll just hear from the Minister. The Minister has the call.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and I really appreciate this question from the member for Moncrieff because it's a broad one that allows me to go a little bit back to basics with the parliament about what's happened to housing in our country. Speaker, we have got a housing crisis in our country that has been building for 40 years. This is a crisis today which is hurting literally millions of people who live in our country. Speaker, we see that for renters who are living with a housing insecurity and rising rents in a way that should never be happening in a country like Australia. We see it for young people who are desperate to get into their own home, who are doing all the right things, saving, working hard, and yet watching that opportunity go further and further away from them. And, Speaker, if we want to get to the absolute worst aspect of this crisis, we see it everywhere in our streets of suburbs, where a rising number of Australians are literally without a roof over their head. Now, Speaker, I have a pretty traditional view. We got into this parliament to solve the big problems facing our country. And there is not a single person behind me who looks at that situation and says, we're not going to do anything about that. Speaker, I say this really clearly to you. This is a situation hurting millions of people. Those opposite are the only people in the country that cannot see we've got a broken housing market in this nation. And I've talked to the parliament about some of the examples previously. We've had 400% house price growth in this country in the last 25 years, and those opposite don't want to do anything about that. They just want to let that continue, Speaker, while we watch aspiration and ambition fade away for younger generations of Australians. Speaker, we have got polling which shows us that 81% of Gen Z—
Order. The minister will pause. The manager on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. And the question was a little bit broad, but it was focused on rents, and we haven't heard rents mentioned once. Not once. And I think it does. No. I was being helpful by saying it was a little bit broad. But she can't mention the word rents.
The manager
rents.
The manager can be
because
helpful
rents are
by
going
resuming
up.
his seat. Thank you. You don't need a lot of commentary with points of order, as the manager knows, but he's made his point. The Leader of the House on a further point of order. To the point of order.
I'm not sure how much more I can add than what the manager gave up himself. But the first half of the question made everything from yesterday's question relevant by referring to yesterday's question. So that of itself completely broadens this out.
Yeah, the question contained yesterday, the minister said, so that's going to be reflected in her answer. Speaker Wallace, on the 24th of November 2021, dealt with this issue. Well, when the question was very open-ended, it talked about the minister's or Prime Minister's position, so we'll have to follow that example as well. Order. So if you get a broad question, I think everyone's been here long enough to realise there will be a fairly broad answer, but so far the minister is being directly relevant regarding the comments she was asked yesterday. She was asked about rents in terms of that question, so the Leader of the Opposition, when I'm trying to deal with an issue, it is not helpful for you to continually be interjecting on me, as you're doing now. So don't interject while I'm speaking, because I'm trying to assist, just as the manager was, the running of the House.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And I'd just say to those opposite, it helps when you come to the dispatch box on questions like this to have a leg to stand on. And I just remind those opposite that they had 9 years in office. They did not raise Commonwealth rent assistance once in the time that they were in office. They didn't do anything about rental standards. In fact, Speaker, remember, they were so checked out of housing that for most of that 9 years they didn't even have a Commonwealth Housing Minister. And I say very directly to the renters of this country, Speaker, they have never fought for you for a single day that I've been in this parliament. We're addressing challenges in our housing market to help renters across this country get the thing they want most of all, and that is a real chance at home ownership.
Not happy with the level of interjection, particularly from the member for Page, who was yelling during that answer to the minister. You are now warned. If the member for Page interjects one more time, he will not remain here for question time, and there will be consequences for his actions. Okay, we'll move to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government tackling gambling harms, and why is it important to strike a balanced package of reforms?
Give a call to the Minister for Communications and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Boothby for her question and for her conscientious leadership in this very complex policy area. Mr Speaker, many times the Prime Minister or I have stood here and noted that no government has gone further to protect Australians from gambling harm. And today the government is pleased to note that we are going even further. And that's because the Albanese Labor government is a government that listens and a government that delivers real change for Australians. As we have listened, we have heard that many Australians having a bet is a bit of fun, but for some it can become a trap from which they cannot escape. For many of us in our electorate offices or in public, we have heard that inducements can quickly turn toxic for someone when gambling is no longer just a bit of fun. And because of that, along with all of my parliamentary colleagues here, I stood with delegates at our national conference to unanimously back more action to reduce the harm of inducements. Following productive discussions with the Coalition, both sides of the parliament have agreed to work together to bring additional amendments that make our reforms even stronger. The further amendments we have agreed to include
banning inducements for 14 days after signing up with a gambling company, banning inducements on all red flag customers, banning inducements for 3 months after a person deregisters from BetStop, and banning commissions to staff or affiliates based on customer activity. Mr Speaker, gambling companies know who to target to bet more. These amendments will require them to use that intelligence to identify and protect potentially vulnerable customers. On advertising, we will also be stepping up protections. We will enshrine current protections through the Commercial Television Industry Code of Practice into law, and we will extend them to online streaming services. This means restrictions on gambling ads online will match those for broadcast, with the cap now starting at 5 a.m. The rules that are now in place for advertising during children's shows will also be enshrined in law. We will also extend the blackout of gambling ads before live sport from 5 to 15 minutes.
Order.
For services subject to the triple lock system, the opt-out choice must be displayed prominently so people can make an informed choice. We are also providing further choice for Australians by introducing a wagering advertising opt-out register, a single mechanism for people who choose not to see gambling ads to have it applied across all of their online services. This is a strong, comprehensive, balanced package, and I thank my colleagues, parliamentarians and stakeholders for their engagement throughout this process. These reforms will deliver real action to protect Australians from gambling harm, whilst also ensuring we strike the right balance. I thank those of us who have walked with us to finalise these important comprehensive package of reforms. I particularly thank the Shadow Communications Minister in the other place who has worked constructively with us. Politics often revolves around conflict, but days like these shows us we can work together to deliver.
The member for Casey has been interjecting too many times for the House's benefit, so I shall warn him as well. So the member for Page and the member for Casey are now on warnings. I'll give the call now to the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. On Labor's watch, median capital city rents have soared from $470 per week to $690 per week. Will the minister guarantee rents will not go up by 30% because of Labor's toxic taxes?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And with regard to the number that you've asserted there, I just point you in the direction of the PM's comments and the clarification from National Australia Bank today. Speaker, Labor has a long-standing concern for Australian renters, and our passion for addressing the issues in Australia's housing market, it is really about them. Speaker, this share of our population, in many ways, they are bearing the brunt of 40 years of policy failures in housing. Speaker, they're in a situation where they're insecure in many of their tenancies, rents are going up too fast and too frequently, and for many of them, Speaker, they live with that agonising experience of the thing they want most of all, which is home ownership, moving further and further away from them. And, Speaker, that is why our government has the boldest and most comprehensive housing policy of a Commonwealth government in 70 years, Speaker. What do renters of this country need? They need us to build more homes. They need help with Commonwealth rent assistance, as our government has lifted it by 50%. They need improved rental standards, which our Prime Minister has negotiated with every Premier and Territory leader, and they need a realistic pathway into home ownership. Now, Speaker, I might just really politely point out to the parliament, our government is doing all these things. Those opposite largely want to undo them all and create an unfair housing market for Australia's renters. Now, Speaker, with regard to the impact of the tax changes on renters, the parliament is also very well versed in this. We talked about this in Budget Week. The Treasury has looked at the government's policy, and the advice is there will be a negligible impact on rents. Why is that the case? You just heard it from the Prime Minister, Speaker, and I remind the parliament again that for everyone who was a landlord on budget night, They continue to get access to negative gearing because of our decision to grandfather the arrangements. And in fact, Speaker, it goes broader than that. If you owned a property as of budget night, then you are able to continue to access these concessions. Speaker, our policies will also get more rental households out of the rental market and into home ownership. 75,000 renters will get that opportunity, and more renters we're also building more homes for renters. Now, Speaker, there's going to be a lot of politics about this debate. I think the fact that the Liberal Party of Australia is expecting us to believe that they care about renters is really telling us about the politics here.
The Minister will pause. Order. Members on my left. The member for Parkes can leave the chamber under 94A. This continual non-stop interjecting is just not acceptable for the House. There are norms that we all need to follow, and that kind of behaviour is not acceptable. Order. The manager now has the call.
And it goes to relevance. This was a much tighter question, and it was asking about a guarantee. Will you guarantee they won't go up by 30%?
Order. The Leader of the House on the point of order.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, the minister was comparing and contrasting briefly on the exact topic that was in the question.
Yes, she has entitled to do some compare and contrast about the government's position, but that can't be the remainder for her answer, which I'm sure she will adhere to. She has 30 seconds, and she was asked a specific question, so I'll ask her to return to the question and be directly relevant.
Speaker, there are going to be lots of political points made about the situation facing renters, and what I'd ask Australian renters to do is actually not listen to the politicians, listen to the people and organisations that exist only to protect the renters of this country. And I want to read a quote for you from Everybody's Home. They say rents have been surging for years. They say rents have been surging for years, partly because investor tax breaks have been fuelling the housing crisis. The idea we should be doing more of the same is an insult to the intelligence of renters across this country.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health, Ageing, Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme. How is the Albanese Labor government securing the future of the National Disability Insurance Scheme? Why is it important to protect the NDIS so that it will be there to support future generations of Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Ageing, the Minister for Disability and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker. I hope you don't mind, Speaker, me also giving a shout-out to my dad and fellow Vietnam veterans on this important day. But thank you to the member for Macarthur. He's an experienced paediatrician who knows more about childhood development and disability, I think, than anyone else in this building. And he knows that the NDIS is one of Australia's great modern reforms. In just 15 years, it's gone from literally a dream of generations of activists to a cherished institution. It's transformed lives profoundly, it's made our country better, and it's put Australia at the vanguard, Speaker, with the NDIS genuinely the centrepiece of the most comprehensive suite of supports for people with disability you'll find anywhere on the planet. But, Speaker, it's grown too big, it's costing far too much, and it's become a soft target for shonks and crooks, Mr Speaker. For months now, I've said that this simply can't go on. And more importantly, I've said that we simply can't afford for the NDIS to fail. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that today the Senate will consider, and I'm confident, pass our plan to get the NDIS back on track, to set down the clearest possible path to a secure, sustainable future for the world's best disability insurance scheme. Now, I know this is hard reform, and I know it's causing anxiety in parts of the community, Speaker, but it is essential. And I want to thank the many, many people through the inquiries and elsewise who have engaged in a frank and constructive way to make this bill the best possible version it can be. This House has already passed 30 amendments to the bill with government support, and today we'll be moving 33 additional amendments in the other place to clarify aspects of the package, to provide detail around the commitments we made from the start, to ensure there are protections for participants with high support needs or who require 24/7 care, and to further tighten protections around fraud and integrity and inducements, frankly, which have been too loose for far too long, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the Shadow Minister, the member for Lindsay, particularly for her engagement on those amendments around fraud and integrity, but more broadly for her firm but constructive approach to trying to reach a bipartisan position on these essential reforms. There is still much to do, even after this bill passes, Mr Speaker. This parliament should be deeply proud of everything the NDIS does every single day for hundreds of thousands of Australians. But these changes will ensure that it can provide that same security, dignity and support for decades to come.
Call to the honourable member for Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. Yesterday, after repeated refusals, the Minister finally agreed to meet with veterans over his cruel cap on their care. This morning, one of those veterans, former Air Force fighter jet pilot Dr Tim Nelson, said this about the Minister's behaviour in that meeting. He walked into the room, refused to shake our hand, sat down with his arms crossed and rolled his eyes. Will the Minister please apologise for disrespecting veterans by rolling his eyes at Australian heroes?
The call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question, and I thank those veterans for meeting with me yesterday afternoon. And I acknowledge that I got it wrong in not agreeing to meet with them last week when that initial request came in. I own that, and I met with them and I heard them last night. When I came into that room and I met with them and they were sitting down, I said, "Relax, and I want to hear what you want to tell me." And I was very clear about listening to them. I don't agree with the characterisation that you have just outlined, and I shook the hands of those people who attended that meeting as we finished that meeting, to be clear. And I was grateful for the information that they imparted to me, given the diverse range of experience that they had both medically and as veterans. And I, of course, take all of that feedback on board, as we will take on the feedback as part of our consultation process in making sure that the way in which this change to allied health services that enables better payment and higher payments to providers so that there's better access for veterans, to make sure it operates with no gap in care. And as I said to them last night, and I've said with every veteran group that I've met with after this announcement, it has always been the government's intention to make sure there is no gap in service provision where it's clinically required, and we want to make sure that we get that right. And as I also said to them, and have also said many times, I understand that there is a distrust of the DVA's capacity to deliver that. I get that.
Order.
I stood at this dispatch box in one of the first speeches I gave as minister to apologise for the failures of DVA in the past, and we've been fixing that and making that better. And we are not trying to make things worse. We want to make sure we deliver a change that makes allied health care access easier for veterans, with a different approach, but with no gap in service provision. I was very happy to hear their thoughts on that, and we ask all veterans and service providers to engage in that consultation process to make sure that we get it right, to improve that standard of care for our veterans.
Call to the member for Riverina on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, I'm just seeking leave to table a transcript of a press conference this morning with the version of events from the veterans who outlined what they felt was disrespect in that meeting with the Minister.
The Leader of the House. Thanks. Give the call to the honourable member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why and how is the Albanese government strengthening universal superannuation, and how does this compare to other approaches?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Banks, not just for his question, but for his unwavering support for Australia's world-leading superannuation system. And that's the difference in this parliament, Mr Speaker, because this side of the House is delivering real change to boost wages and cut taxes and also boost retirement incomes by strengthening the superannuation system. Those opposite don't support the superannuation system as it stands, and that's because they don't support Australian workers, Mr Speaker. The thing that they have in common, whether they're Liberals, Nationals or One Nation, is they don't support super because they don't support workers. Now, this side of the House, in delivering that real change, recognises the fundamental and essential role played by universal superannuation and especially preservation when it comes to economic security and decent retirement incomes for millions of Australian workers. That's why we boosted the super guarantee to 12%. It's why we're paying super on paid parental leave. It's why we're paying super on payday, Mr Speaker. It's why we legislated the objective of super. And I think one of the most important things that we've done is in increasing the low-income super tax offset, we are boosting the superannuation and the retirement incomes of 1.3 million Australian workers on the lowest incomes. And the reason I finished there, Mr Speaker, is because when this parliament was given the opportunity to boost super for low-income workers in this country, those opposite voted against it. They voted for less super for more than 1 million Australian workers, and that's because they've got form. When it comes to coming after workers, coming after wages, voting against tax cuts for Australian workers and undermining the superannuation that workers need and deserve in this country, Mr Speaker. Now, ever since the mid-1990s, when the current National President of the Liberal Party, a fellow by the name of Tony Abbott, described superannuation as a con job, that has been the prevailing view in the Liberal Party, the National Party and now One Nation as well, Mr Speaker. And that's why the next election will be a referendum on the superannuation system, on whether workers in this country can continue to benefit from universal superannuation with preservation at its core, or whether we will see the end of 4 decades of super being an essential part of the retirement incomes of Australian workers and taking the pressure off the pension, Mr Speaker. So the battle lines are drawn over superannuation, Mr Speaker. This side of the House not just defending super from those opposite, but strengthening it where we can to give the workers of this country the retirement incomes and the economic security that they need and deserve.
The call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Sport and Communications. Much of Australia's regional sporting infrastructure is community-owned, outdated and not fit for purpose. Given the gambling industry's enormous profits from sports betting, would the government consider legislating gambling companies to finance a community benefit round to deliver much-needed regional sporting infrastructure in the regions?
Call to the Minister for Communications and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Mayo for her question. The Federal Sports Ministry delivers about $500 million just over worth of sport funding to various grassroots through to high-performance programs across the country. Usually we work hand-in-hand with the Minister for Infrastructure through Thriving Suburbs or regional funding where regional sport infrastructure is required. And I also work closely with our state sport ministers who usually have carriage of both sport and sport infrastructure funding through, for example, the Queensland Gambling Community Benefits Fund to make sure that the priority projects across federal and state are funded appropriately. The $200 million Play Our Way program, which the Albanese government pioneered last term, was the most significant. In fact, it was double the amount of funding that had ever been provided to regional and sporting community infrastructure. I note and agree with you that we had fivefold the number of requests that came in for the pot of money that we were able to give out within budget constraints. So let me agree with you that there is demand there. It's really important for social cohesion. We as governments, both state and federal, use sport as a mechanism to help lots of other policy areas, be it social cohesion through to things in the regions, and I will always continue to advocate for more funding to do great things in sport from grassroots through to high performance. So I guess stay tuned because this will always be under consideration as we go through the usual budget processes.
Call to the Assistant of the Minister for the member for Gellibrand.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, my question is to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real change with a fairer, more equitable and more sustainable superannuation system for Australian workers? And are there any risks to this approach?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
Speaker, I thank the member for Gellibrand for his question, and I acknowledge his time throughout his time in this place championing superannuation and supporting measures that will strengthen Labor's big reforms in that area. The Albanese Labor government is delivering real change to ensure that Australia's superannuation system is fairer, more equitable, more sustainable and works for the people it was designed to serve. We have boosted the low-income superannuation tax offset to support low-income workers. These changes will benefit 1.3 million Australians. These benefits all workers with incomes between $28,000 and $45,000, with an average increase in the Listo payment of $410. Those workers could receive a potential benefit at retirement of around $15,000, depending on their individual income over their career. These are real benefits. We have better targeted superannuation concessions to improve the sustainability of the system, while preserving concessions that benefit millions of Australians. We are also closing loopholes to ensure superannuation serves its intended purpose and that the law does not work against victim survivors. No perpetrator of family violence should benefit from their victims' superannuation death benefits. That is why this government has committed to reforms to prevent perpetrators accessing those benefits. Again, these are real reforms that strengthen the system. Earlier this year, we legislated the Survivors Law to close a loophole that enabled convicted perpetrators of child sexual abuse to shield their assets in super. These are important reforms that strengthen the integrity and confidence of the super system. But our work continues. Tomorrow, I will announce further reforms to strengthen consumer protections for Australia's retirement savings. These measures will improve protections for members and help ensure the super system delivers for those who really need it. Taken together, these reforms reflect a simple principle that superannuation should reward work, support retirement, protect the vulnerable and operate in the interests of members. In contrast, the Liberals, Nationals and One Nation have made it abundantly clear they don't support universal superannuation. Some of those opposite half-heartedly say they support it, but the Shadow Treasurer says it's idiocy and Senator Bragg says it's the worst decision since Federation. Well, if super has friends like that, who needs enemies? On this side of the House, we know that Australians work hard, they play by the rules and they deserve a fair go in retirement. Whether it's supporting low-income earners, better targeting tax concessions or closing loopholes, the Albanese Labor government is strengthening superannuation at every stage, because we believe that if Australians work hard, play by the rules and save for their future, they deserve dignity, security and independence that comes with a good retirement.
Call to the honourable member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker, and to the veterans here today, I see you. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Earlier this year, the Minister had to be dragged kicking and screaming to restore funding to Doug and Kay Baird, the parents of slain Victoria Cross recipient Cameron Baird, VC MG. Yesterday, the Minister had to be dragged kicking and screaming to meet with veterans about his cruel cuts to their allied health care. Will you now do the right thing, Minister, and scrap the $5,000 allied health cap?
Call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for his question, and I really look forward to him and members of the opposition and the veteran community and the allied health professional community and our ex-service organisations engaging in the consultation around how we ensure better access to allied health care. At the moment, we have a situation where people accessing allied health care have to continually go back for further and further referrals. And we want to make sure that we make that easier for our veterans, and we also want to make sure that there continues to be practitioners across the allied health environment that will service our veterans, because we've continually had the complaint that the fees that we are paying to them have not been sufficient for them to keep servicing our veteran community. And so we've been looking to address that as part of our measure.
Order. The Minister is being directly relevant to the question, so he was talking about the issue that he was directly asked. It's going to be difficult to raise a point of order when he's explaining his position on the question he was asked about. Member for Herbert.
Speaker, it is on relevance because he was talking about times to see allied health, not about a cap. The cap's the problem. No, it's not the same.
Resume your seat. Yeah. Resume your seat. As I said, the minister, I can compel the minister to be directly relevant. He was asked about a range of things before he got to the question about meeting veterans and the allied healthcare arrangements. So there's quite a little bit in this question that he's entitled to be directly relevant. He is being directly relevant.
The government announced changes to allied healthcare in an effort to improve access to allied healthcare by ensuring that we are attracting more allied health professionals into providing those services to support our veterans. That means changing from a system of continual regular referrals and GP visits to a $5,000 threshold where there will be an alternative process for approval for all those veterans that have a clinical need that may be above that. Recognising that the overwhelming majority of our veteran community go nowhere near that amount of use of allied healthcare, and it also allows us to make sure that we're improving the nature of treatment and care for our veteran community. As we've been clear, the way in which that process will operate for those smaller number of veterans that may use over that, where they may have complex needs, and we recognise that. We're engaging with, we will be releasing a discussion paper shortly to fulfil that consultation process, engaging directly with veterans, and I look forward to the Shadow Minister's feedback as well as those of veterans, our ESOs and our practitioners.
Order. We'll give the call to order. We'll give the call to the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real change for Australian women and families? What are the risks to this?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank our Whip and the member for Lalor for her fantastic question. In her electorate, more than 2,600 parents benefited from paid parental leave just last year. Mr Speaker, on this side, we've always been for women being paid more when they're working and caring for their families, and paid more in superannuation when they retire too. Of course, those opposite share a very different position. On this side, we back higher wages. We've got the lowest gender pay gap in Australian history, and we back women's retirement incomes. On retirement, we back the low-income super tax offset. We back payday super for earlier, more frequent employer contributions. And in the last year, we have been paying superannuation on paid parental leave, and that has made an absolutely huge difference to women's retirement incomes. In the first year of paying super on paid parental leave, around 200,000 people have benefited. There's an estimated $285.5 million extra in their superannuation because of that. So a woman with a median superannuation balance would be around $5,400 better off in retirement because of this. Now, a lot of people have more than one child, so let's take an example. Let's call her Charlie Sue. She has 2 children when she's 30 and 33. Because of our changes to paid parental leave, when she retires, she would have an estimated $10,400 more in her superannuation because of that change that we have made. On this side, we want people, mums in particular, to have more in their super. On that side, they're determined that people will get less superannuation. Those opposite say that workers are lazy, they should be paid less, they should be easier to sack.
The Minister will pause. The member for Goldstone has injected 9 times in this answer alone. This continual, non-stop interjecting on every answer is unacceptable. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. Don't act surprised if you're going to continually be interjecting all throughout question time. I give people a fair go, but you cannot just continue to keep interjecting non-stop. It's not fair for the person answering the question, asking the question, or anyone else in the chamber. Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those opposite keep saying people should be able to take more out of their super. Well, If someone aged 30 takes 20 grand out of their super, they're $93,000 worse off in retirement. That's their plan. And don't forget, when they were last in government, they're now deputy leader of the Liberal Party, whatever her title is. She said people should take money out of their super to escape domestic violence. That was their proposal when they were last in government. We've made the leaving violence payment permanent and legislated 10 days paid domestic violence leave. That's what we've done to help people who are leaving a violent situation. They say they should be using their superannuation to leave domestic violence. Mr Speaker, we back higher super. They're for cutting it.
Concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Minister for Aged Care. Last night on Four Corners, Professor Kathy Eager described the algorithm which determines home care packages as fundamentally flawed and argued the government should ditch it and start over. People regularly approach me with concerns about access to home care, and now people are concerned that the assessment tool is just wrong. Will the government establish a mandatory automated decision-making framework, including human oversight, as recommended by the Robodebt Royal Commission, to improve public confidence and trust?
The call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. Can I firstly address some of those issues that she's raised around the integrated assessment tool? The integrated assessment tool is part of the single assessment system, which was a key recommendation of the Royal Commission. And this is about delivering a system that is efficient, accurate and fair, so that no matter where in Australia someone lives or who does their assessment, they are always treated equitably. The IAT standardises the way that older Australians are assigned funding and a priority level for support at home through a classification system and a prioritisation system. It was developed using data from 20,000 assessments across diverse demographics and refined with direct input from our outstanding assessment workforce before going live. It supports assessors to make and record their subjective clinical judgment about the older person and their circumstances. The aged care rules are then applied objectively and equally to those clinical inputs to determine the outcomes in a fair and consistent way. Now, this government has always said that we'd watch very closely as these reforms roll out. The Royal Commission found that the former government's priority was the minimum commitment that it could get away with, but ours is guided by the rights of older Australians and their ongoing lived experience of the system. That's why last month I announced our government's plan to establish a new legislated escalation pathway so that outcomes of the aged care integrated assessment tool can be changed in extenuating circumstances. In the small number of cases where a person's complex circumstances are not fully captured by the assessment tool, under the new pathway, their assessment can be escalated to the system governor and adjusted if necessary so they get appropriate care.
The Leader of the
Our
Nationals
escalation pathway will be the practical, responsible protection the system needs without compromising the care of older people. This change is in addition to the change we made earlier this year to amend the prioritisation system's queue rate in order to reduce the wait times of a person assessed as high priority from just over 2 months on average to just over 1 month, and our changes to ensure people with MND are automatically treated as urgent. Minister Butler and I have also directed the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing to undertake a rapid review of the support at home prioritisation mechanism to make sure that the right people are being fast-tracked for the care that is desperately needed. While this work is occurring, importantly, the median wait time from request to completion of these assessments is consistently under 1 month. Mr Speaker, we promised older Australians that we would rebuild the aged care system that we inherited in tatters, and that's exactly what our government is focused on doing.
Call to the honourable member for Brudden.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. How is the Albanese Labor government working with state and territory governments and with industry in order to support the response to the detection of H5 bird flu in Australia?
The call to the Minister for Agriculture, the Minister for Fisheries and the Minister for Forestry.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank our fabulous member for Braddon. And I know that the member for Braddon has been closely following the H5 bird flu outbreak, and she now has obviously some detections in her electorate, quite a number in Tasmania. And I do want to reassure the House and the public that our response has been swift and coordinated, and that's because of the early investments that we made, the $113 million, to making sure we were as prepared as we possibly could be, and our response capability on the ground with the states and territories is what it should be. But I'm pleased to update the House that the vaccine rollout that I announced last week is progressing, as guided by an agreed national approach and the technical advice of the experts, with states and territories identifying the priority species for vaccination. Over the weekend, the New South Wales Government has announced priority species identified for potential vaccinations in New South Wales, and they include little penguins and the regent honeyeaters. This builds, of course, on the announcements last week from the Western Australian Government about its vaccination trial of threatened cockatoos at the Perth Zoo, including the Carnabys, the Bordens and the forest red-tailed black cockatoos. The Tasmanian Government, of course, has indicated that it will prioritise the vaccination of the orange-bellied parrots. And I'm pleased to advise the House an update today. The Victorian Government has now commenced the vaccinations of little penguins at Phillip Island and will then do St Kilda. As I have said, the vaccinations are one part of Australia's bird flu response, but strong biosecurity remains our strongest line of defence. The technical advice that our government has received is that as bird flu becomes more widespread in the wildlife, counting individual confirmed birds no longer gives us the clearest picture of where the disease is spreading. And that's why our reporting of the bird flu detections has now evolved from individual cases to focus on H5 events. And over the weekend, our government launched a new national reporting dashboard on birdflu.gov.au. This dashboard collates the data provided by the states and territories. It shows where the disease is spreading, which species are affected, and the number of events in each area. This allows people on the ground to easily understand and see where the bird flu is in Australia. I can report that there have now been over 250 events in Australia of the H5 bird flu, and Australians can be assured that our government will continue to update the public as regularly as we can as things change. I want to again thank the Australian public for reporting sick birds, and I can advise that we've now had over 22,000 calls to the national hotline. And I want to reiterate that there remains no detection of our bird flu in the poultry or agricultural systems, and that the risk to human health remains low. If you see sick or dead birds, please do not touch them, avoid contact, record what you see and go to birdflu.gov.au.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper, and Mr